finding out the balance between those two things has been difficult. I think in a lot of ways it's hard to know how much of it you have to sell, like how much of the sci-fi world you have to sell before you can just put somebody in a desert and be like, that's Tatooine, you know, like how much of Tatooine do you have to sell prior to Tatooine being like just in somebody's mind as a planet.
What's going on, everybody? Rob Mabry here, writer, director, and producer of The Legend of El Chupacabra. That's a sci-fi horror comedy film that you can check out on Tubi, Amazon, and Apple TV. Today I have with me Chance Smith. Chance is a film director, writer, producer from Houston. He is responsible for the sci-fi anthology series Tales of Jovia, and he is in production on his first feature film, The Mauve Artifact. Chance, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, great. You know, I'm a big fan of sci-fi. I'm excited to talk to you about you know, what it means to make a science fiction film as an independent filmmaker. But why don't we start out? Tell us a little bit about how you became a filmmaker.
Yeah, I guess without trying to go back as far as like possible, be like when I was a child, films inspired me or whatever. The first time I ever really was like making films, I was really big into music, so I was doing a lot of like making, albums and stuff when I was in like high school. And then I literally I watched, I think it was Clerks 2 and then like a couple Cheech and Chong movies, and I was like, oh, I could totally do this. And so I started trying to like make funny comedy sketch things, and I was so bad at it. And then I took off a lot of time and was just like, okay, I'm gonna go into writing, because that was kind of what myself and my co-producer on all of our kind of sci-fi stuff, we've been friends forever. And we were just like, okay, let's write a book series. So we wrote a book series called it was essentially Jovia archive things, the Tales of Jovia kind of stuff. We wrote a book and we tried to get it published while we were in college. It didn't work out. And then by the time I went off to grad school in sociology, and I was kind of, we were both, he was in law school, I was in grad school, we were kind of doing separate things. The pandemic hit, and I was like, I don't know if I want to do this anymore. Do you want to go back and try and make a film again? And so we made the first short film in the Tales of Jovia like series that we made. And then that kind of sparked off all of it. And so it was a lot of like, well, how do we build a set? How do we do any VFX? How do we do any of this stuff? Like we bought a camera and then we were like, let's just go for it. I did make a couple shorts like prior to that, and the kind of I was in New York at the time, so I was just kind of like trying my best to, hit the ground running and do some stuff to learn the ropes on my own. So I made a short film, and then right when I got back to Houston, I made a feature that never went anywhere. Actually, mid-production, somebody got COVID, and it was like right at the height of the pandemic, so we like shut production down fully, and then we couldn't finish. So we were like, well, we have like a 60-minute film that doesn't tell a story anymore. So we went back, and it was just like, okay, that's kind of scrapped, and that's what kind of led us down the Jovia path, which is what we wanted to do in the first place. So it's kind of with the Tales of Jovia stuff, it was essentially trying to take characters that we wrote in a book form and make them into their own different, unique stories. In a sense, to try and build up to, we still have the goal of making that original book series into its own like film series or something like that. But we didn't think that, doing giant space battles was super feasible when we had one laptop to do VFX on and, one camera and like a crew of maybe two people. So it wasn't like we didn't think it was feasible to do it at that point. But yeah, that's kind of how we got into it. And then over the past 2 years, give or take, we've been making sci-fi short films. We made about, I think, 8 sci-fi short films in the past 2 years, and then those have been both compiled in like a season and then compiled in a feature that we're actually releasing. I was looking at the distribution of it like this morning prior to getting on, and then so that's kind of where we're at, and we're making a feature right now, like our first real, like, that's not just an anthology of like our series put together into a feature.
Yeah, so you talked about at least gathering the courage to make films by looking at Clerks and Cheech and Chong and going, I can do that. From a science fiction standpoint, like who were your influences? What were the films that inspired you?
It's gonna be like the worst answer to it. I'm just a devout Star Wars fan, so like I've always like I've always been a fan of even the ones that people don't like. Like I love episode one, and I saw it when I was like a kid in theaters, and I was like, "This is mind blowing." And I think that like that fundamentally changed my brain chemistry. It's also like sci-fi has always been a thing. Like me and my friend who do make the films together, Harold, we used to play in his backyard with like lightsabers. Like not like once, but like every day. We had like an ongoing storyline and all that. Like so it was, and like up until we were older than we should have been, like playing in our backyard with lightsabers, kind of stuff. So um, it's always been kind of there. As far as like films that really inspired me, have I didn't really think I could do most any sci-fi stuff until I started seeing things like the Trip to the Moon and things like that, like old like George Méliès films, where I was like, oh, you can tell a story with very little. Forbidden Planet. That was the one movie that I saw like when in high school. I was trying to figure out where I was going, where I was like, oh, I see the seam lines and I can see where they like where the set ends, where the big like backdrop starts and all that kind of. I was like, oh, maybe it takes a lot of money to build this set, but it is a feasible. I can see how they got from like point A to point B on that project. So there's a lot of old sci-fi films. At the point where I started getting really, really into it, Netflix was so early on in its like streaming lifetime that they had like every George Méliès film up, or every like old like weird sci-fi movie that I could find up on Netflix at the time. So there's a lot of like different things, but I'm constantly inspired by like the Star Wars and Dunes and all of these kind of ones, but much more on the fantastical end of things. Um, Hard sci-fi is fun. Don't Personally, I don't find as much enjoyment and fun out of the hard sci-fi than I do with like the fantastical elements of it. But yeah, I'm trying to think. I think a lot of it is, you know, older sci-fi films like Planet of the Apes and Forbidden Planet and things like that that I think are really the kind of drawing point to getting into sci-fi and wanting to make sci-fi films, or at least seeing this like the ability to make it. Like seeing people in ape costumes or seeing the Forbidden Planet like robot costume, like it's hard, but it doesn't seem like it's impossible. And as technology has moved so far forward, like I look back at episode one of Star Wars and I go, I know how they did that green screen. That's relatively simple to put together and,
Yeah, yeah, you
to
can do
do
it
on our
now.
own nowadays. So,
Yeah. So I can certainly see the influence of some of those films in what I've seen of Tales of Jovia. So for the audience who is not familiar necessarily with that anthology series, tell us a little bit about that world and the series.
yeah, so I always have the problem of I want to give the biggest lore dump of all time. We built like I've said, we've built this for about 10 years now. So we've had lots of time to think about all the different things that happened. The Tales of Jovia as it stands as a series was initially going to be one short film and then became eight over time. So it was the initial idea was to make one film around a bounty hunter who is take like it's his first bounty mission that he's had, and so he's going to kind of take this guy to like the person collecting, and in the process he's like, oh, we got to get off the ship, and the ship's breaking down, and this person needs to go to the bathroom, and there's no bathroom on the ship, so like then the guy runs, and so it's a whole story about like him trying to recapture this bounty, and kind of his first mistake as a bounty hunter. And then from there we were like, well, I don't want to make another action adventure one, so we made Peace of Mind, which is about a crash landing on a planet where a person and AI system are there. Or for the person to live, the AI system must be deconstructed and rebuilt into a beacon. And the AI is like, kill me, and the person's like, you're my only friend. So it's like this dynamic between whether or not like to kill this AI system. And then we made a romance one, we made a horror one, like a found footage horror one, and so on. So it was all kind of an attempt at every point to just like try a new genre, to try something different each time around. And I mean, we fail and succeed at different levels on each one. I would say the found footage one, which is almost exclusively something I'm put together, is probably our least quality one because it's found footage and it's and I don't think we put the most amount of time into that one. But then we have bigger ones that are like a rebellion on a sci-fi planet and the kind of internal struggles of what happens when like people betray other people within a rebellion. And so it doesn't build on each other in any really significant sense. There is one sequel, I think, in throughout the whole thing, which is Peace of Mind. That character is in there, is in another one called Lies on Ganymede at the end. But for the most part, they're pretty separate, like iterations of the anthology series. And then all of this kind of was building up, and if you kind of watch it, and they're all time date stamped and so on, so you can kind of see how it builds throughout the history of this world. What it's building up to is this kind of discovery of an artifact that becomes the kind of main thrust of the Mauve Artifact like feature film. So it's all set in the same universe. It's got a little bit of fantasy. There's some like fifth dimensional is what we call it. It's essentially our force powers. But there's some of that kind of fantasy stuff. But for the most part, it's pretty just, campy sci-fi action. I like to think of a lot of it as like violent Power Rangers in some sense. At least the action one's concerned.
Yeah,
Very cheesy,
probably
but
more F-bombs from what I noted
yeah.
than Power Rangers, but
The funny thing about that too is that that is not exclusively so Live they curse a lot in. The script has almost nothing in it. Like it's few like pointed versions of it. I mean, we were so early on with directing that we were just like, they always say that like actors need to find their character and all that. And so we didn't really direct the dialogue super well. And then we got into the edit and we are like, oh, every other word's a swear. Like we all the dialogue is this way. It's funny because we like specifically the words that they chose were words that like have no version
I'm
in the
very
script where they
familiar
ever
with
say
that
it.
on the Legend of El Chupacabra. Like when I got into the editing booth, I'm like, what is up with all of these F-bombs? Like I go back to the script. Okay, there were a few in there, but it was like I've got an R-rated film here, just based on profanities. Yeah, actors
Yeah,
actors
it's
love the F-bomb. What are you going to
I mean, it does add intensity. I can't deny the intensity, but whenever I think actors a lot of the time forget that this is a sequence of events, and so they're like it really intense in this one scene. They're like, "This will work well for this line," and then when it's put into the context of everything else, you're like, "Well, yeah, you've said it like 30 times up until this point," and so you know, but and you're not on set thinking about that kind of continuity of it and all that, and so when you get to the
Yeah.
editing like bay, you're just like, "Ah, this is a lot of it," and then you just have an R-rated film on your hand, and I mean. I will say a lot of the when we do screenings and stuff, we're somewhat attempting to be kind of considerate of it. But I will say a lot of like actors that we've had in films who are young or like family members have come and seen it, and they don't usually say much. It's actually the older family members who are like, "That's a lot of that going on in this film." Um, so yeah, I've heard it quite a bit from my mom and dad.
So, one of the things that I noticed is that, in addition to writing, directing, and producing, you and your partner Howard are also responsible for a lot of the sets, the props, the costumes. Tell me about kind of, where does that experience and knowledge come from, and how has it informed your filmmaking?
Yeah, so Harold and I do everything that's not no, I think everything. I was gonna say everything that's not like in his name, something, but I don't think there's not a thing that we do, at least as far as like prop design, set design, so on, that we are not the people who are like actually using the drill or the like sewing machine or something for. Um, it is not skills that we have. We are consistently bad at carpentry. We are consistently bad at like at costume design and prop design, and it's not that we don't aren't attempting. We've gotten significantly better over time, but it's something we didn't have a lot of skills in. I'm not. I have no carpentry skills whatsoever. Neither does he. We're both like professionals in our like practical training. Where at like law school and grad school, they never taught us how to do anything like that.
Yeah.
Um, so we're kind of we didn't know if we could do it. What really happened is our first film, Live, we had a big spaceship in it. And we were like, well, we need the exterior of the spaceship. So we sat for maybe I think probably 2 months and built three walls to a like exterior spaceship. And it doesn't look like great, but it's enough to kind of sell the triangular spaceship structure. And we built that one. And we found a bunch of mistakes. We made a bunch of like we just did everything we could have done incorrectly on it, but it worked. And so we took a couple films off. We were like, let's not build for a little while. And then when we came back to, I think it was Mauve might have been the first time we built another set since Live. There might be something in between there that I'm forgetting. But when we came back to like doing this feature, we were like, okay, we have all of these locations that either we need to find a place to, film at that's got to fit all of these aesthetic pieces, or we build the set. And even if we're not great at it, we can spend a couple weekends really just kind of honing in and rebuilding and building and rebuilding and so on until we have what we want. So it's a lot of like we have a lot of time to do stuff. I mean, maybe not tons of time, but we have enough time to do all of this stuff. And I think that is somewhat and ambition, which I think is overpowering the lack of skills. Plus, we run our kind of studio set out of my dad has property and he has a big like barn on his property, so it's essentially just like an empty studio warehouse
Nice.
situation. So yeah, it was one of the few luxuries of having like your childhood home burned down is that like whenever they buy the new house, they buy specific things. And that was one of the things that like so we were like, okay, we can build here. So now we go there and build and my father, unlike me, has actually quite a bit of carpentry skills. So every time he does that thing that parents do, where they'll walk in periodically and they'll go, "That's not how you build that," and then he'll fix it for us, and it's
Hold my
always
beer.
my God, every time, and it's always better. So we've gotten a lot of help on that front. We actually are recently switching away from set building. We love like the set side of it, but the cost benefit of it has been kind of skewed pretty heavily, where it costs us a lot of time and energy and money to build these small sets, and they're not the quality we want. So we've actually moved a little bit over more so to doing some blue screen like sets and scenes and so on with like practical foreground stuff and non-practical background stuff. I'm trying to get closer and closer to what it would feel like to actually do studio days with a little bit of green screen, a little bit of foreground
Yeah.
elements, and so on.
Yeah.
But yeah,
Talk
it's
talk to me a little bit about that process and um, it's a lot of thought has to go into a shot that involves visual effects. So I'm curious, are you storyboarding these things? Is it just really kind of documenting it? Are you winging it? And how do you compose those shots and make sure you get something that is going to keep the audience in the film?
That's a fantastic question. I so a handful of things. One, we when we wrote the script, we like knew that there were going to be things that we were going to like. Okay, this is going to have to probably be on the front of like either blue screen or build sets or whatever. So there's somewhat of a chunking out of of it where we like when we location yes location categorize, we're like putting everybody in these specific sets. So we kind of figure out where we need to be, and which ones of these are going to be in that kind of framing. When it comes to the actual shots, we have the like we break our script down into like smaller, shorter day scripts, and then rewrite our day scripts every time. So we rewrite that day script, and then we shot list that entire thing. And so when we do that, it's me, Harold, our DP Eli, our assistant director Shake. All of us are kind of in the room, and we rewrite the script, make sure it feels right, given the context of what we've already filmed, and then kind of go in and shot list everything out. Once we shot list without the practicality of it. So it's like we're not concerned with like how would we get this blue screen shot? How would we do like this set? Like what are these things that we're gonna have to practically worry about later? We try to ignore as much of that as possible and just be like, okay, what would we like to see? I'd like to see when they're fighting, a hook go around this person's neck and then get dragged down. Like that's a very particular shot. I know I want this. And then from that point, then Harold and I usually go back to that shot list and go, okay, how do we want to actually like film this, or we're going to build it practically, because some of these shots, especially like fight scenes, have recently gone back and forth between small sets locations or green screen blue screen days, so it's been a back and forth like three different options for all of them. But in the context of the blue screen stuff, what we do is I'll build out the environment in totality around like in Blender before we kind of even get there, or Unreal, but I'm not great at Unreal, so I usually build it in Blender, and we figure out what that kind of the entire world itself is going to look like. Every shot is already planned, so what I'll do is I'll go in with that CG model, and I'll go in and kind of try and find the angles closely enough to what we're going to be at, and then just kind of screen cap those or render them out at those particular images, so we have all of them. So when we're actually filming, we can kind of somewhat line up what the VFX shot will look like with that practical shot, light it accordingly, and then those green screen or those VFX shots get entirely taken away by the end, and we just kind of replace them with new ones where we're lined up everything and it looks proper. But yeah, we spend quite a bit of time at the beginning and pre-production trying to design what this like set is going to look like if we're doing it all impractically, like all virtually. And we kind of go through a bunch of different iterations on which way would be best to handle it. We've done rear projection before. We've done sometimes if it's close enough, we can do like a TV screen with like a small like framing around it, and we're close enough to it where you can't really tell that that's a TV
Sure.
screen, so we can get rid of those things. And if push comes to shove, we do it on like a big blue screen set, which is actually what we're doing Saturday. And those ones are the most difficult, and they're very very particularly planned out. I try my best to avoid motion in them, to like do our best to at least I storyboard with at the end, like on our final round of it, with the intention of everything being tripoded and stable, and so I
Yeah,
don't have to
yeah.
think about motion tracking. And inevitably Harold comes back to me and goes, there's not enough motion in this shot, it doesn't feel good, we need we need more action, we need. So then we inevitably do.
I'll just add some camera shake in post.
Yeah, yeah. So that's what I'm saying. Like I could do. Don't worry, I'll get it all posted. Like no, we need to get some of this practically. So eventually that modifies. There's always this kind of give and take. As I've told, actually, I was just talking to Harold about this yesterday. I was like, everything is practical. But the more shake, more movement, the more things that you do on that blue screen, the more work it's going to be in post. But everything
Oh,
is feasible.
it's a nightmare. Like
It really tracking is
keying
my least
things
favorite
out.
part.
Yeah, it's terrible.
If
Um,
I didn't have to track all the time, I think my life would be a lot easier. If just tracking was it, I don't even the Da Vinci's Magic Mask is awesome nowadays. So like I'm like masking and keying and all that stuff simple. It's that tracking and make sure it fits with the motion of what's going on, and like it that always is something I've consistently watched like a million YouTube videos about, and I'm like, I don't know, it's not working on my side very well. I'm gonna have
yeah,
to keyframe every shot so that it feels right.
I get that totally. I often revert to rotoscoping, just because keying and dealing with the motion tracking is a nightmare. Well, I appreciate you kind of walking us through that process. Certainly have similar experiences myself with Chupacabra. I had like 100 VFX shots on it. It's like tedious, hard work, but can also be really satisfying and enjoyable. So, um, you've made, I think, 10 shorts over the last 2 years. Um, that's a lot of filmmaking experience in a compressed amount of time. What did you learn through the process of making your web anthology series, and how is that contributing to kind of maybe amplifying or leveling up the quality for the Mauve Artifact? And sorry, before we go on, I think I was calling your partner Howard. Sounds like his name is Harold, so
Yeah.
apologies
Oh, yeah.
to
No,
Harold.
I don't even know if I clocked Howard beforehand. So, but yeah, we learned a ton. To begin with, it was just uh, the first film. We learned that we can't abuse people's goodwill. That was the big thing we learned. Like Harold and I can put in a million hours into building something, but like we had to move a set, and it was raining, and it was 5 a.m., and we was just like we had to transport it a mile on a back of a truck and a trailer, and it was all that kind of stuff. So really, there we learned like don't we can't abuse people's goodwill, because like the next day we were like, hey, we had to cancel because of rain. Can we come back tomorrow? And everybody was like, nope, I'm busy. Got things to do. Sorry, can't do it anymore. Like I'm soaking wet and I might have a cold, so I can't. We learned a lot like on that front, especially as we kind of move forward. Who is like wants to be crew members, who doesn't want to be a crew member, who's like kind of willing to put in weird hours of time, because like filmmaking is such a it exists in the somewhat ambiguous time frame sometimes, where like you have to just wake up at 5 a.m. and go and knock out a set moving thing, and you're tired and you have three Red Bulls in your system. It's not, you're still not able to function, kind of thing. So like we
Yeah.
learned a lot of like that. We've over time went from having, so when I made my first feature that didn't get released, it's called Happiness. It was totally un-sci-fi related, but on that project I had a PA who came in on that project, and then by the time we done some other things that kind of just don't end up making it to like public light, that we kind of worked on throughout the years. Um, Eventually Eli became our director of photography. So it was like we kind of bring people in a lot of the time on PA and have them build up. So like Shake was the same way, he built up from PA to assistant director, or like and then we have like kind of, so we've over time built our crew up. That was the biggest thing. Actors are um ambitious, and a lot and their work is very clearly shown on screen. Assistant directors are, while ambitious, is not clearly shown on screen all the time, and that's, I think, sometimes the harder people to pull on were these crew members, but they're the ones that make everything look better. So it's like that was the big trail. That was one thing that we kind of built up over time. Um, we also learned, like, we trialed out different things. Having the 8 films, we didn't have to sit down, and I know a lot of people are of the mind of like, kind of sit on this project for a while, work on it for a long period of time, make sure that it's as good as it can be. And we took a very much of like, if it's finished approach, and instead of like it can be perfect, we were like, I can see the seam lines, but send it out there to the world. We got another project to move on to. So because of the speed that we were also producing it at, like it was like one basically every month or two, we were like putting out a new film, or at least that's what it felt like production wise. By the time we were doing editing on one, we were already in production on another one. So it was like at the end, we were just like, it's good enough. But each time we tried new things. Like the first film, we tried out like a big set and some practical miniatures for like the spaceship in space, and realized that like, okay, the amount of time it took us to build a miniature takes me half the time to build it in CG. So like, oh, we'll just build it in CG. I know that that works easier. So it's like a lot of those kind of little things. We realized too, like throughout it, is that, and I think this is a personal thing. I have this issue where I'm very controlling of the image and what it looks like and how it feels. And like when I storyboard, I'm like, that is gospel. We're done storyboarding. I have done it. And
Mhm.
that's not how that works, and that's not the best way to handle it. So it's a lot of like, now I have to be like, does this shot work? Is this something that y'all think is interesting? And by communicating with everybody, and obviously having Harold as like a co-director, we're always bouncing ideas off of each other. And so it's a constantly we're, as Harold says, we argue with each other, but we don't argue with anybody else. We'll complain to each other and be like, "That shot's stupid." Well, no, and so a lot of it is like me being more comfortable with things not looking the way that I thought they were going to look in my head, because most of the time that looks better in practice than it did in my head, as an idea. There was actually something recently that I was telling Harold about, that I was like, this looks better than I even thought it looked in my head. And so that's the way we go about it. So a lot of it was like me learning how to be a better uh, teammate on stuff. I guess not ball hogging, try to make sure everybody gets the opportunity, and really letting people who like, we have a director of photography, we should trust him to do the directing of photography. Like that is their job. And he's really great at it. And so a lot of it was kind of us building up our skills, learning how to communicate better with one another, and then writing stories that I think at first a lot of our stories were like, we have a forest by my house, we have people in a couple costumes. Why don't we just make a bounty hunter story that we can do really fast in this location? And Mauve Artifact, by the time we got around to that, we were like, we literally, when we were writing it, we are like, okay, let's not think practically at all whatsoever. Like, let's just write a script that we think is going to be fun and something enjoyable. And then on the back end, we'll worry about the practicality of it. Like, that's something for like a different day version of us, like while we're writing. And so I think that is a change in our mindset and the way we approached it, where even by the latter end of the series, we were filming at like a cabin in the woods, and like doing it at like not Paladuro, Pedernales Falls and stuff like that, like places we know we could get access to. We weren't gonna have to, I mean, we probably should have applied for a park request, but we knew we could get in with people and a camera and not really show,
Yeah.
and just kind of guerrilla film it all. So we were still very practical. This time around, it's been a lot more of like we wrote and then we figured out the practicality later of like, okay, now we need to call Mohanan Sand Dunes and we need to call the whatever state parks and get their approvals on everything, and it's all of that kind of stuff. So it really changed. I think the practicality and not worrying as much about the practical side of it was helpful. But also during that time, I've gone from being able to make maybe one planet in Blender, across the course of 3 months to like I can pump out a shot, for VFX stuff, which I think changed a lot of the dynamic. Like we don't have to worry about practicality as much if we know how to film on blue screen and we know how to add in the elements we want to add into and know what's practical and what's not practical and so on. So
Yeah, so those skills in Blender, a VFX program, does compositing, does an awful lot. It's free. Um, is that something that you were interested in and gain some skill and then were able to leverage it, as a filmmaker, or were you basically learning everything that you needed to, in service of the films that you were
I I loved the idea of Blender. So I'm gonna give you a little weird amount of backstory that might be interesting to people. There used to be a Lego online like build your Lego set thing that was like when I was a kid, you could go on like Lego.com and build it. And so that plus a couple other like SimCity type things. I was always like interested in like the how do you fabricate something in 3D space that doesn't exist. Like that was always interesting, but practicality wise, like and Blender specific wise, I didn't pick up Blender until I know it was the Corridor Crew people. I watched their podcast and I listened to their watch their YouTube videos. They talk a lot about different VFX softwares, so I knew about it from there. And then we got to filming Live, and I realized I needed a planet in the background. So like it was step one doing that, and that's actually the advice I tend to give people is that like you could watch the donut tutorial, which I'd never watched. I
everybody, what, you didn't do the donut tutorial?
Absolutely
Like,
not. Did not do it. And the reason is I got through the first one and I went, "Oh, I'm so bored. I hate this. I don't want to learn Blender if this is how Blender's going to be." So instead of doing that, the first real time that I started like, okay, I need to well, really the first one was the planet. The second one was maybe a couple different planets, some asteroids, things that were relatively procedural in regards to Blender. And stuff I knew I could render out really fast. Then I got to the point where I was like, okay, we need to make a planet and a ship flying through the planet and on. So it just kind of developed over time in regards to like what shots we wanted. And I will say there are like maybe 10 shots total that are full like 10-second renders that took my computer like a week to render out that still never got used because we looked at the shot in the end and we're like, nah, that doesn't work. Even though I had the previs done, I had all of it set to everybody, we all just at the end were like, nah, it doesn't work, it doesn't fit the vibes. um, I learn every project I try to like only focus on what new things to learn in Blender based upon what we need for the project, and through that, have developed a really good understanding of how Blender works. Think when and this is what I always tell other people whenever they're like getting into it is if you're trying to do the donut, it might bore you. It might be something that's irrelevant to you. You're going to learn a lot of skills too that maybe might lay deep down the road help you out, but right now might not help you out. And you're trying to, you have a practical need likely for it. Focus on the need, watch a YouTube video on like how to build a room or how to do a planet or whatever. That'll get you most of the way to it. And then over time, like I still have questions. Every day I'm working on Blender, I get onto Google, I go, how do you do this thing? And then I watch a quick like 1 minute YouTube video and I go, cool, now I know how to make fog in a environment. So I think and then I can retain that and I know that I mean my repertoire of Blender skills is very specific to what I'm doing. So I don't know how practical it is outside, but I've done some VFX work for people outside of our projects that have kind of led to that. But I don't know. I always tell people to learn something practical because if not, like, I don't know, I got really bored with it. I can't sit and watch a donut tutorial for I think it's 12 hours, 6 hours, something like that. I can't do that for that long. And I can't keep focused on a YouTube video while trying to work. So I have to kind of watch it little chunks and then go back to it. And also like just it's keeping up to date with what's going on technologically, changes that have become coming out in Blender or like new programs that are coming out and so on has also kind of made some of the old practical things null and void. Like some of the old techniques are somewhat outdated at this point because there's a a click button that does that job. So some of it is like as it increases, things that were really hard that you did need to spend hours learning are now one click. Like rotoscoping is now so much easier than it used to be
Yeah,
before.
for sure. So on the topic of things becoming obsolete, um, where do you see AI fitting in from a visual effects standpoint? And, kind of what's your take? Are you using it at all? It's a controversial topic,
Yeah,
for a lot of people, but clearly it continues to get better and better. So just wondering how much you've explored that and kind of what, is your opinion on it?
I am actively, and I'm not looking at my phone out of rudeness. I need to check on a very particular thing. As of an hour ago, was having a conversation with an AI. I constantly, so I very much love it. I teach professionally, so like at the college level, and I have to deal with a lot of like plagiarism related to AI. AI is largely, in my opinion, like, AI is stupid. It's a dumb thing. It doesn't have thoughts. It's not. You know, and especially when you're using it for creative purposes, I think that um, it can be a shortcut, but not a lifeless shortcut. It doesn't have anything to it. It doesn't have an experience, and that's actually what I've been talking to my AI about trying to get it to develop a personality to understand, like, itself and all. It's weird sci-fi stuff. I'm interested in seeing how they
Yeah.
communicate about it so that I can develop new ideas. Obviously not producing anything, just kind of running through it, but they don't have personality. Like there's nothing there. So they're not pulling from a experience. They're just, and really at the end of the day, like things like stable diffusion are just like if you have the same seed and the same prompt, you're going to get the same image every time because it's really a library of images that exist for it because of the like denoising process that like there are only very particular things. So it's not unique. I don't know if it's even copyrightable. It's like all of these issues exist within AI. I have used it before. There is probably an image or two throughout all of our projects that maybe have like it was like a single image that was cut out that I used and moved and whatever. There's a couple probably of that stuff throughout it. Um, there are things that like I couldn't have probably built in VFX or I didn't have the skills to build in VFX yet, like those kind of things. I think that when it comes to um, using AI consistently to build it like Sora, for example, or the other, I know there's another one out that's like Sora because I think Sora didn't get released, but like the text to video AI, where it's like,
Hmm.
here, make me this thing. It just has no life to it. There's no nothing to it. And I think it's kind of like it's like collage making, I think, in a lot of ways, where like AI is maybe a good like magazine to cut out, but it's never a good end product. It might function as like a small little like, oh, I needed this one particular component of a whatever, and so I can get an image of that and cut that out. But at the end of the day, like I don't think it ever looks good. It doesn't ever work well for me. It has no life to it. So as of late, the only time I've ever really used it is developing procedural generation things for Blender. So Blender allows you to have a Python script uploaded to it, and then
Hmm.
it'll run that Python script. And then I have experience writing Python, so I would write some code. I'd send it to I use Claude because it's a relatively good coding AI. I send it to Claude. Claude goes, here's a bunch of mistakes. Here's how to make it better. And then we run through iterations, and I put it in. I see does it work, and then what that does largely what the systems I've developed look like is that they output out like um engine or a cylinder of some sort or like that has some weird sci-fi texturing to it or whatever, and then
Gotcha.
those are like the building blocks to they're the Lego pieces that I can build a ship out of, but they're never the ship itself. It can't I just don't think it's smart enough to do half of the things we want it to do yet.
Not yet.
And it's missing any life. It doesn't have experience, and I think that that's a huge downside. Um I don't fear people's jobs being lost because it's the same way that I'm sure if I was involved in it, but I was too young for it. But like the switch from film to digital, I'm sure like but I feel the same way about it as I do with AI. Like there are jobs that will be lost because of AI, and that sucks. Like that's a terrible situation. but it's also not replacing like real creative intent. They don't have experience. They don't know what to do. So like you're mostly losing like your holder of a camera or this person who runs the reel as opposed to losing like the creative process. Now I think Natasha, whatever, I can't remember her name. She was in Orange is the New Black. She's directing a movie that's like about AI and like 50% AI generated or something like that. And that's a little fearful. I'm curious on how much an artistic voice comes out through all of that, and how wonky it looks because AI still is. I mean, it's still not like perfect. It doesn't look like real life in any significant way. So I fear that kind of stuff. But I think as a tool, I think a lot of people forget that like Roto Brush 2 in Adobe or DaVinci's Magic Mask or all of these things. These are all AI derivative things. They are all things that are doing a job that is built into them that is automated.
Yeah, I
And
think
so like
most filmmakers are using AI, whether they know it or not. Um, I I have more faith in you in AI and AI's capabilities. I'm actually making an AI short right now using a tool called magiclight.ai and klingai.com. It is a sort of Pixar style, short film. I think it's very good at that. And it's not perfect, right? You have kind of all of these artifacts and deformations, and there is definitely a bit of brute force, to accomplish what you want. But yeah, I think it'll be interesting to see where it goes. And I think just, for me, from a technology standpoint, I'm interested in it, and that's why I'm doing it. And it is like, um, uh, you know, I'll always have, human actors like do the voices. I'm not interested in replacing that sort of performance. Um, but I do think, like, for filmmakers, get on board or get left behind, right? There are a lot of things that you can use AI to do that will save you time, and it's not necessarily about replacing, your creative output, but just making you a more efficient filmmaker. But anyway, I'll get off my AI
well, I
soapbox.
had I had three actually, just some like follow up, really brief follow up points. One, the I mentioned Corridor Crew already. They did an AI, like they live action filmed themselves, and it was like live action to anime adaptation, and they trained their own but it's not just a general AI, it's one specific one. I can't remember which one, but they trained their own AI to output very particular. They hired an artist to do all of their background things, and then they filmed real actors, and they just used their, I think it was Stable Diffusion. They just used the Stable Diffusion system to take the images they had and make them into these anime versions of themselves, and then animated. They took all of those video clips and then recomposited them into this anime um, uh, short film. It's really cool, and it's like a great use of a bunch of the different bits of the technology. And like their whole point was like, we don't want to abuse the artist because it was all that copyright stuff going on at the time when they were doing it. And they were like, okay, well, what if we just removed the artist, like the exploitation from it, and just added made but paid one artist to consistently draw a bunch of things, and then we'll use that to train on. And I was like, this is fascinating. Like, this is a really cool way of handling it. I've also seen another person who made, they would film people on green screen and they would just AI the backgrounds, and there was this like beautiful, like surrealist, like very um somewhere between like a Ralph McQuarrie and like Logan's Run looking kind of thing, where it's got like the aesthetic of a Logan's Run, but like very Ralph McQuarrie's kind of drawing style, as backdrops to like these live action, like surrealist sci-fi kind of stories and so on. And it was super cool. I think that overall people are so scared of AI in a way that they don't also understand the technology in any real way. And I've spent a lot of time trying to learn the difference. 'Cause as I said, I teach, and so I spend a lot of time being like, you wouldn't let text to speech on your, or text to predictive text on your phone write your essay. So don't let it write your essay. That's not doing anything. But like if you needed to, like if you're like, I'm stuck. What are 10 ideas to write about a sociological essay? And it pumps you out 10 of them, and then you go, you know what, that one's a good one, I'm going to use that one. That's the use of it. It's a tool. It works as a tool. It's a great tool. but people are using it in ways I think sometimes that is over the ability of that AI, or are so scared to use it that they're gonna be left behind because they're avoiding the use of something that's like they might not even actually be avoiding it. They're using RotoBrush. Like they're using this. I think that they're
Hmm.
not, like you said, they're not aware
Yeah.
that they've been using it the whole time.
Yeah, well, I mean, even something like, hey, AI, this is my film. Give me some ideas on how to market it, and you'll get a bunch of incredibly valuable information. So, yeah, give AI a shot, filmmakers out there. Hey, let's get to the Mauve Artifact and talk a little bit about your film. So, tell us about the story, how it's come together.
Okay, this is my favorite topic of conversation probably ever. I would love to talk about it. So, um, I'm gonna avoid all the kind of backlog of everything of like what happened prior to it, but essentially the film is about there's an artifact that is a it existed prior to humanity by a species called the Rimians. They use this to genetically enhance themselves to make them transcend to the fifth dimension. This is somewhat irrelevant, but it's the Prometheus background to this kind of whole story. Um, Humans, after they leave Earth, a bunch of different smaller societies develop external to Earth. One of them, the Telex Federation, finds this artifact and uses it to create a genetic modification between or hybrid between humans and a beast creature, and they create a new species called the Chronesians. The story follows both a past storyline and a like contemporary storyline, mostly the contemporary one, but some flashbacks historically to what happened there. Essentially, the premise is that in the past, the first experiment that was successful broke out. He or accidentally released a toxin or a plague onto the humans that he was immune to, but he didn't know he was immune to. They didn't know they were going to be sick to it. But it kills off all those humans in that area. So he is viewed as he starts recreating more versions of himself and basically creates a whole society of similar creatures, these hybrid creatures. They view themselves as divine. They create a theology around it, and by the time the contemporary society exists, they are a theocratic, authoritarian society that believes themselves to be divine and better than humans because they lost their history. They don't know what happened. That kind of they just know that they appeared and humans died in the area, and they were resistance to what killed humans, making them see themselves in this more divine way. The contemporary story, what we're mostly following, is a bunch of different people find out that artifact is no longer missing. It's like their holy grail. Like it's very Indiana Jones in this way. Like everybody realizes that it's available, and they're like, we're all going for it. So you have a rebel who is hired to bodyguard a scientist who's going on his way. They're the main group that you're following. A a princess who is the theocracy's like one of their royal family members who is excommunicated. She's after it to kind of topple the theocracy, and then a couple people who are there for money, a pirate queen and a bounty hunter that live the bounty hunter from the first one. Also, all these characters for the most part are characters from the series that have the same actors, same character that are kind of ported over, so it does develop on it. But you're following all of these different people as they arrive to a planet, and then they develop weird alliances with each other about like who do they trust and who do they not trust. And they have a couple different fights throughout the process as they're all somewhat searching for new information to get them closer and closer to the artifact. And yeah, that's the general premise of the whole story in some long detail. I'm not good at elevator pitches. So
Well, that
that's
wasn't
the
bad.
good that's my kind of long form version of it. There's a lot more to it. Everybody has individual, very specific motivations on why they're there and what they're doing, and it's not always related to this kind of religious theocratic idea. A lot of people are motivated by their own personal interests on like wanting to be move up the social hierarchy through the obtaining this kind of artifact. But yeah, it's very much as I've been explaining it. I tried to find new ways of explaining each time, but the one that always has hold true to me is it's very much like Prometheus meets Indiana Jones is the best way I know how to phrase it. Where it's like people on a very normal, like cheesy kind of action adventure, like very 80s kind of style film underlying this very dark lore about like hybrid creation by humanity and humanity's like attempts to play God and all of these kind of things. So it's got a lot of that. People ponder in some philosophical ways, but for the most part, you're watching people get their eye cut out or like chopped in half or whatever. So it's a lot of that kind of stuff too.
Yeah, so very very large in scope, right? Like not the typical thing that would be recommended to an indie filmmaker. Like, hey, if you're going to make your first movie, why don't you make a giant sci-fi adventure epic? That seems like the right direction to go. Clearly, that's not the advice that's generally given, but talk to me a bit about why that, right? But also, on an indie budget, how are you managing, to deliver on your vision?
Yeah, so why that is because we kind of built up for um 2 years kind of doing all of the groundwork laying, learning what we can do and what we can't do very well, learning what actors we want to bring on and not bring on, learning ways to rewrite the scripts that work well and storyboard for action or things like that. So it was a lot of like we spent the 2 years building up to it. Also by the time we were finishing our short films, they were 40 minutes long, so it wasn't like a short film. It was like that's a full episode of TV, and like the hour, it's like it was a long bit of stuff, and so the whole final season is kind of like that. They're all really long episodes. In totality, it's a 2 hours and 40 minute long movie, for the whole feature version of all of those things. So it's quite a bit of stuff. We knew that we could practically put together something like that's long and expansive. The Nobody, I'm assuming nobody would have ever been like, "Hey, this is a smart idea to do." So we just kind of, I don't know, we wanted to build upon what we already had in a way that felt uh, I don't know, expansive. It felt that like we were in the world. And every one that we've done prior is very small scale. It's like trying to like a bounty hunter fighting a person or a person on a planet or what. Like it's very small, and none of it has this kind of giant scope of like people are traveling from planet to planet. They're at different places. Like they're in spaceships and whatever. Um, the We wanted to expand it like that. In order to actually achieve that, we had to break it down to a bunch of different little pieces. One is like we have like just purely practical stuff, and I say purely practical as if I'm not going to put a spaceship in the background or change the planets and what you can see in the atmosphere or whatever. Like those will be changes, but things like we're going to film in the sand dunes in West Texas. We'll film up in Inks Lake in Austin area. We knew that we had a couple locations that we were like, for sure, these look like the planet enough, look like the different locations we need to go to. We don't have to do a ton of stuff. That's actually a majority of what our movie is. We realize that we can sell sci-fi really well, in the same way that like Planet of the Apes does it, where if like you show a little bit of sci-fi and then the rest of it doesn't have a ton of like big effects and stuff like that. There's no spaceship or whatever. It's just maybe a couple people in like some ape costumes or whatever throughout, and then you go back to sci-fi at the very end. Like that couches it within this kind of big expansive world. It makes it feel a lot bigger than it is practically. So we spend our whole first act as like people on different planets and different heavy CG stuff and so on. And then by the end, it's also that. But the middle of it's a lot of that is practically shot at different locations around Texas. And so to do a lot of that, it's like we shoot mostly on, oh no, not even mostly. We shoot almost exclusively on weekends outside of one day this upcoming like month or two, where we just shoot on weekends when people have time. A lot of our actors are like they work full time doing stuff. Myself, Harold, Eli, we all everybody in the crew also works full time to kind of outside of the filmmaking stuff. So we shoot on weekends. We kind of go out and uh, um, go out on location for that time period, and that is what the ability to kind of shoot across a weekend, knowing we can knock out 15 to 20 pages that weekend across 3 days, that allowed us to be like, okay, we can chunk it up. So when we first started production, we were like, we'll start at January and we'll move from January through all the way through March of 2026 was kind of our plan of action. We're going to take 18 filming days and spread it across an entire year and a half of filming, meaning that we could practically prepare in advance for each segment. We also broke it down into phases. So like phase one is the easy stuff that's in the first act. So it's nothing that's like major fight scenes or major CG stuff, but it's just kind of the practical, like people at an office talking or people doing. And so that was what most of phase one was. And then phase two was all these like small sets. So we actually built a set of walls, I think four walls that we built that were, we just repurposed them every time. So we would go in between shoots and we just tear everything down, repaint them, restructure them, and then use them for a different set. So that was kind of our way of getting through all of those small sets. And then now we're kind of moving on to a big chunk of it, which is that filming outside stuff, which is it's the most expensive side of it by all means, mostly because it's a lot of actors and it's a lot of like going to locations and doing all that kind of stuff. And then
Yeah.
the end is a lot more VFX stuff again. By segmenting it up like that allowed us to have the time to build sets. It allowed us the time to develop props. We've done multiple iterations of certain characters' costume designs over that time period. So it allowed us like 6 to 7 months to sit there and go, okay, the bounty hunter looked like this when we first did promo shots for him over a year ago. We need to change this and that and the other so that he looks better. And we kind of had that at time to have everybody do all these things. So I think the spreading it out and knowing what things are practical and trying to limit the amount of things that we do either by building a set or doing on green screen allowed us the ability to kind of, well, when we're in the practical place we can do so much stuff. Like there's not, we don't have a worry about, like we can do all, everything can be handheld motion and whatever.
Yep.
And then everything else has to be very particular, and finding out the balance between those two things has been difficult. I think in a lot of ways it's hard to know how much of it you have to sell, like how much of the sci-fi world you have to sell before you can just put somebody in a desert and be like, that's Tatooine. Like how much of Tatooine do you have to sell prior to Tatooine being like
Yeah.
just in somebody's mind as a planet? That's kind of the issue we've had, but hopefully we're hitting that mark. We're making, we have a lot of like big VFX shots around like planets and stuff. So hopefully we're able to sell it. I think we'll know better in a couple months once we get a lot of these shots done in the desert of whether or not it sells that location based
Yeah.
upon
What
like what we
what what's been the biggest challenge so far with the production?
it has. It's, to be honest, it hasn't been a very difficult production. I mean, knock on wood.
Man, you better.
Yeah, I know, right? I'm gonna do it one more time just for the sake of it. Or as my grandmother said, you can knock on your head, because it's your hardest wood. So that's she used to call me hard headed. So she was like, you can just knock on your head if you want to. It hasn't been the hardest thing in the world. There have been a lot of really hard days throughout it where it's like it's just hot and we have 35 shots to do and we're all irritated with each other and people showed up late or somebody, so it's a lot of like those just normal, like every job would have an issue of. And being essentially a manager for this a crew, you come across the manager positions. Being a manager sucks. It's always terrible to have to coordinate people and be like, "Hey, I know I'm your friend, but could you also like show up on time, please? Because I need you." Like like it's those kind of things. And
Yeah.
that's been the hardest stuff. We've lost some crew members throughout, not because of like they didn't want to be involved, but just like they changed their schedule at work, so they have to work weekends, so they couldn't do anything anymore. So it's like a lot of that stuff. I think the biggest on-set practical challenge that we've had has been building physical sets. Those suck. They're hard to do, and they're hard to make look good in any real way. Especially if you're trying to build like a spaceship, and you're working with wood and drywall and paint. It like doesn't always work out, and you can follow all the tutorials you want to about how to put whatever they greeblies, whatever on the walls to make it look like it's got a bunch of detail. But there's only so many amount of like gardening supplies you can put on a wall before you're just like, well, this looks like a garden,
That's
like
right.
so it's
Fast
that
food containers glued to the wall. Yeah.
two Coke bottles taped together and then attaching a tube to it to make it look like they like are holding some. It's all of that stuff. I will say we've done some fun things. Like we made a practical coffee machine, which like had a bunch of connectors on the walls that led to a funnel, and then that funnel actually was a PVC that went to the backside. So we would I put a bunch of coffee in my mouth, and then I just put my mouth on the PVC and blew it through the PVC so it spit down into the cup. So there's some like cool like things like that
Yeah.
that I have a lot of fun
There you
with
go. That's
practical.
some DIY filmmaking there. I
Yeah, I
love
mean,
it.
I have fun with the practical side of it. I think it's one of the more enjoyable parts of it. I have a whole notebook of just drawings and things like that. And I'm like, oh, this would be a fun idea. What if we did this thing? And it helped us get into the scene. But yeah, the hardest part has been building those sets, and I would say even more than that, it's been moving sets. Trying to get them to take them from like storage thing to putting them out and decorating them and getting them ready has always been the hardest part. And we have to go up usually a day before and set up the set and get that all set up, and then go back home, sleep, wake up at like 4:30 in the morning, and then get back there in the morning. And that I think is the hardest part. But we have an awesome crew and an awesome cast, and so there, it's been a relatively easy move through because everybody is in agreement that like this is something we want to do, and we know how much effort's going to have to go into doing this. And also we've planned our actors to come only on particular days to make sure it's very scheduled around like phase one we're doing all of this person, and phase two we're doing all of this if they're solo, so that we don't burden an actor. That does create another issue of like we haven't seen them for 6 months, so like things change in 6 months between these people. But yeah, that's been a lot of kind of that the practical issues. I will say my wife, who's our vanities person, would probably have a bunch of other notes about like how hard it is to paint people purple and how hard it is to put wigs on people, how hard, which I don't have a
Yeah,
good understanding of, because I just look at it and I go, that's a purple person.
looks
That's
good.
great. We did a good job.
Yeah.
So I'm sure she would have a ton of things to say about it. But as far as like I experienced in some real way, the hardest parts are moving those sets, which is why blue screen and stuff is a feasible, like realistic option to make things easier on everybody.
Yeah, so you're our first Houston filmmaker. Tell me a little bit about the film scene in Houston. What is that like?
Um, I don't want to say non-existent, but I don't want to also say that there's a ton of people here. We had a couple of big events that happened in the city. By the time I started, the Houston like film scene was kind of non-existent at that time. So maybe a couple years ago, there was nothing really there. It feels like the pandemic sparked a lot of people to get back into doing things that they creatively were, enticed to do and whatever. So initially we had like the Film Commission, which is very like, and the Cinema Arts Society, which are both very and there are people there that I like, so I'm not going to speak ill on the individual people, but very much a pretentious crowd of people. It has to be very well, like high quality film, and that's not what I'm doing. Like we've been making some campy sci-fi. Like it's hard to get those people who are very much wanting a new A24 film to come out of Houston to be like, this is what we wanted out of it. And I understand that's not their vision. So that was this whole other side of it. And when we got into the filmmaking thing, I and like really try to be involved in the community, there was not a lot of places to that were accepting of that kind of style of filmmaking. That was until a group called, they're now called the Not Another Film Group or something like that, Film Association. Either way, it's David Clark and Brian Delaney, who Brian is also the composer for our film. So we know these people pretty well. But I didn't meet them before this, but they basically came in. They were like, these are boring events. There's nothing happening, and there's very much like people who already have an in with the industry patting each other on the back, and that he was like, that doesn't help anybody. And there's a lot of people making not great films, but films nonetheless, who don't have the ability to show it to anybody. They don't know anybody to talk to about it. They don't know how to get better at these things. So they started this organization maybe a year or two ago. And since then, the film community has been a lot more bright. There's a lot of people who go to it, a lot of people who've gotten involved. People like I wouldn't have expected to get involved, people who were, work construction throughout the day and very much kind of present themselves in a very like, masculine, like hardworking kind of, that manner, who come to these film events and are like, I would like to act in whatever you have, and are kind in these like ways, and you're just like, I wouldn't have expected this person to be the person who would come. But because of how inviting these events are, there's people who maybe are taking a risk in their own life to go and do something creative, who are showing up to these things, and that's pretty cool. I will say there's not a ton of like distribution avenues and so on. We've as a company, so not another film screening has done their own screen, or film association has done their own screenings. The River Oaks theater has just reopened. We did a screening there. I think one of their first, if not their first, indie screening since they came back. Actually, prior to Wes Anderson showing the Phoenician Scheme in the same theater, so like maybe a month or two prior to him doing his premiere there, we were showing our sci-fi films there over like 2 days. And so we have like we've done events like that, but there's hard the screenings are few and far between. There's some organizations who have kind of popped up to do that, but there's not a lot of distribution. There's not a lot of screening opportunities. So that's kind of I think what where we're working at as like as a city is to have enough filmmakers to have enough like consistent screenings that are bringing in a lot of people. But there's just no producers, there's no distributors, there's no and maybe that'll change with the new bills that are coming into place, but I don't know. I'm hoping for. I love Houston. I was born and raised here, so I don't want it to not be a viable market. And I think that you can make it viable because it's everything's virtual nowadays anyway. So like you can film from the middle of Podunk, Idaho, and nobody's gonna know a difference. But there's not as many people as you would think for like a pretty I mean the fourth largest city in the US. Like it's not as many people as I would have thought. And yeah, I it seems like Austin's popping off a lot more than we are. It seems like Dallas is popping off a lot more than we are. So I think that it's a struggle between the few people who are in this kind of indie place within Houston to try and make us a market for people to come and film in, and also just like have some essentially some creative voice that's not a Wes Anderson who like the second they have a good amount of like following they're like done, I'm out of here. Like
Yeah.
that's the problem we have a lot of the times. Like people are like, well, I can't make a career here, so I'm out, I'm going to LA. And that's what's happened to almost every filmmaker we've had that's come out of the city. It feels like at least.
Yeah, I'm in San Antonio, and I would say obviously Austin is kind of considered the film hub of Texas, but over the last 5 years, I have seen exponential growth in the number of filmmakers who are making feature films specifically. Now, I think Texas will continue to grow, as a place where people come to make films, but. Tell me a little bit about the screenings that you did. How did you, get butts and seats? How did you get an audience for the screening, and was it, did it meet your expectations?
Yeah, so we've done a lot of different trainings. So we've done before I kind of build up to this River Oaks one. We've done a lot of like coffee shops where we'll like show up and I'll pull out my projector and we'll project on a screen on like a wall in the coffee shop, and we'll have everybody watch the films. We'll do like musical performance stuff. We've done those pretty regularly. That's our kind of on the ground like grassroots. Like nobody has to buy a ticket. You just show up, and honestly, more often than not, we're just bothering people who are in a coffee shop. That's the nature of it. Every time we walk in, we go, I feel bad because I'm definitely going to have to kick people out of their seats so that we can put a thing somewhere. So we've
Right.
done those for a while. We did like the not another film screening, but the we realized that we couldn't we needed to fundraise was our big thing, and we wanted to um show all of our movies that we had. We wanted a release of season 2 of our series Tales of Jovia, so we wanted to do a premiere of that, and we wanted to do it in a place that felt in a theater. So we were looking at like Cinemarks and Alamo Draft Houses and all of these kind of places that you could do something at. Eventually, we contacted River Oaks because they were talking about reopening but had not yet confirmed. So about 6 months prior to their reopening, we reached out and we're like, "Hey, what is the opportunity here?" And they were like, "As long as you split tickets with us, we're good." So they took, I think it was 70-30 ticket split. We got 70, they got 30 of the ticket splits. Plus they're I think owned by Alamo Draft House now, so they are like they sell the food at the thing. So they made good money on us. But once we knew that we could do that and we didn't have to pay, that was a huge thing. And I like developing these kind of relationships. We have one with a local beer garden right now called Axelrad, who's also doing it. Where like we'll sell tickets, they'll get a profit cut, we'll get a profit cut, and they also get all of their food and beverage stuff, so they make good money off of it. I like those kind of arrangements. Every other place was like $1,500 to run a screening, and I was like, I can't.
Yeah,
That's
yeah.
all of our ticket
And then
sales
you
right
have
there.
to
Like
guarantee, so much in concession sales. yada yada
Exactly. And
yada. Like, come
it
on,
was
man.
just so hard. And they were like, yeah, if we don't hit the ticket sale or the concession sales, you have to pay that. And I was like, I can't do that. I'm sorry. And like, so we worked with River Oaks with I think it's Rob over at River Oaks, and I could be wrong about that. But we worked with him on developing some of the like figuring out what we're gonna do and what we're gonna show during this. We did two events in December that were indie film showcase things, and they were separated into two different categories. One was just like indie film, and one was just like sci-fi film. So what that allowed us to do is separate like who was going to come to each event. So the first one had a lot more of like it had our less sci-fi films, the ones that were well, I think it only had one of our films, but it was like I mean it's sci-fi, but it's like the one that's not as in your face, here's a spaceship kind of sci-fi. So we had that, and then we had a bunch of local films that were people who we knew were like I don't know if you've heard of the documentary short film Crystal. I think it's called Crystal, a story of a girl from Texas. But it's done a bunch of won a bunch of awards relatively recently. And we showed them there, who it was made by a local filmmaker. We showed a couple, I can't think off the top of my head, a couple other like different films at these kind of screenings, which brought in crowds of their own to the screenings because we did interviews with the people and all that. Outside of that, we did a lot of promoting. We go to the Not Another Film screenings, we go to the Houston Film Commission. And originally, what we did is we would like show up and we'd make our announcement, and then we'd go, "All right, we're out of here. If you want to talk to us, we'll sit in the lobby for a second," kind of thing. And if nobody comes up to us in 10 minutes, we're out of here. Like, there's no reason for us to sit around and all that. That changed when we're approaching these more recent screenings where we took in is gonna be the funniest thing. But so my mom, when I was like in Little League, used to make felt banners for my like football teams and whatever. And so I went to her and I was like, "Can you make a felt banner for our movie?" And so she made us a big old felt banner that's like the Mauve Artifact, has a big artifact on it, and people could sign it and stuff like that whenever they signed up for our Indiegogo. So we would take this banner, which is 10 by 10. So we'd take it and we'd hold it up at the thing while we made our announcement, very big and loud, try to be as uh, overtake as much space as possible in the context of the event so that we could make sure that people paid attention. So we did that. We also like did tabling at certain events where we had a TV and we would play our short films, on mute, and we'd, have a sign up sheet and QR codes and all that. So it was a lot of like going to events to get people at our showings. But I think a lot of it was just like people who were involved with the film who wanted to come and see it. I know a couple people like came in from like Austin and Dallas who were in films, and yeah, it was a lot of that kind of stuff. A lot of people bringing their own people. We did get, I mean, maybe 20 out of our. We almost sold out the theater the second time, which is huge for us. We were not expecting that. And so
Very
I think a
cool.
lot of that was just friends and family for the most part of people involved. I will say though the ticket sales helped us fund the first portion of Mauve, so that was kind of it. It served its purpose for us, and it was the first time I've ever gotten to see one of my movies in like a real movie theater, and I was like, I noticed a bunch of problems. Like I've been watching it on a computer screen this whole time, and I could totally see a bunch of issues here
Yeah.
that I never would have noticed if I didn't see it that big. And but it was so cool to watch, and
It,
it's
it, it, it is the greatest feeling in the world to sit with an audience and watch something that you've created for sure. Hey, so you're in the middle of production. How can our listeners, follow your journey as you continue to make the film?
Yeah, we're on Inwood Park Productions on every single social media. Our Facebook page, our Instagram is that, our TikTok is that. TikTok is just me yelling about things, so I don't know how much that's relevant. So we post a lot of trailers on there. We post a lot of stuff like that. Our website is inwoodparkproductions.com. Our email is that. Like we're everything at that same name. So we post all of our stuff there, are constantly kind of updating about the film as much as we possibly can. I have the problem of like I'm not a great social media poster, and I don't have anybody who is a good social media poster. So as much as I possibly can, post things about that. So yeah, everything's up on those. I would say our TikTok actually might be the one that is the most relevant that I use more frequently than the rest of them. Um, but yeah, all of our updates go through there. We're I think a third of the way through production, maybe halfway through production, depending on how you really cut it. And we do as much behind the scenes as we can. I used to do a lot more behind the scenes stuff. When people on like social media would ask questions about it, I'd sit down for, a 5-minute video and make a video about how to do a VFX thing or so on. So I try to be as engaging as possible with things. Obviously, content is so hard. I think content's miles harder to make than actual films because you got to keep people's attention for a minute. That's insane. I can't do that. Like at least the other ones they paid $12. They're forced to sit there at least for a chunk of it until they realize they hated it. A minute's hard to keep people, but we try to update as much as possible and answer questions. And honestly, we bring everybody we can in on to projects, at least in some manner. So yeah, that's kind of where we're at, and we can be found, I guess. But
Awesome. Chance, I really appreciate you coming on. Loved the opportunity to kind of geek out about some of this VFX stuff. I hope the audience finds it as interesting as we do. And I'm excited for the Mauve Artifact. Best of luck to you as you continue to work through the production, and we will hopefully see it in theaters soon. Thank you. That's it for this week's episode of the Texas Indie Film Podcast. Don't forget to follow, like, and comment. And if you're a filmmaker from the Lone Star State and you'd like to be a guest on the show, contact Texas Indie Film on Facebook, Instagram, or email at texasindiefilm@gmail.com.